ethics, corruption, state of the state, but do we repeat ourselves? Join us next on Capitol View. Welcome to Capitol View, the weekly program on state politics and government and how it might just affect you. Joining me this week on Capitol View is Brian Mackey, State House reporter for NPR Illinois. Thank you for joining us, Brian.
Good to be with you, Bruce.
And also Kent Redfield, Professor of Political Science, Emeritus at University of Illinois Springfield. Welcome, Kent.
Good to be here.
Big news this week. Well, lots of big news this week. We had the State of the State address by Governor J.B. Pritzker, a well-received speech for the most part. We also had a criminal proceeding north of here with the guilty plea of former State Senator Martin Sandoval in a corruption scandal. Let's start out with State of the State. It was well-received. I was watching Republican leader Durkin speaking afterward, and I would have thought he was a Democrat, the praise that he was lavishing on the governor, who's a Democrat, of course. Have we turned a corner in Illinois where we're willing to work together? Is this a brand new day?
Well, I think if we turned that corner, we turned it last year.
Mm-hmm.
And there was certainly pent-up demand from the Rauner years and the absolute terrible fighting and dysfunction of that time.
Mm-hmm.
And so, last year, Democrats and Republicans were able to come together on a number of issues. Spending $45 billion was one of them. It's always easy to find agreement when there's ribbons to be cut and bridges to be built and roads to be resurfaced. But there were other areas, and the budget has been bipartisan for the last, I guess, arguably the last 3 fiscal years.
Yes.
If you go back to the summer of 2017 when the 2-year budget impasse fever finally was broken by a number of Republicans crossing the aisle and some of them giving up their careers to do so, at least in their view. They decided not to run again, a fair number of them. And so, yes, I think there has been a corner turned, but there will still be differences, make no mistake.
Sure.
And one thing, and I'm sure we'll talk more about this later in the program, but on ethics, I thought it was interesting. I heard the governor made a point, and he had a very forceful statement a number of forceful statements in his speech about ethics. But what jumped out to me right away is he called it a bipartisan problem. And sure, there has certainly been a fair number of bipartisan ethics problems over the years in Illinois. But
George Ryan,
Bill Cellini, who's a Republican power broker working with a Democratic governor.
but he plays both sides of the fence.
Sure. But, recently I have not really heard, the problems in recent weeks and months, and really this last year or two, have been on the Democratic side of the aisle. And a number of Republicans took issue with the governor's framing of this as a bipartisan affliction.
Mm-hmm.
Well, if this is just bad apples, and the bad apples are the people in, some of them are, some of the people in power are bad apples, then, the Democrats have all of the power. So it's going to be a Democratic problem.
They own the apple barrel.
Yeah, but if it's a systemic problem, then if there are problems with the culture, then replacing the Democrats with the Republicans is not going to solve the problem, because all of the things that lead people to temptation are still going to be there, and all of the problems. So the culture was built over a very long period of time. That is bipartisan. Recent history is more Democratic because the Democrats now own all of state government and are likely to do so for the foreseeable future.
Kent, you mentioned the bad apples, right? And I think there was an interesting dichotomy. So the governor gave his speech in the middle of the week. The very next day, there was a meeting of this special task force. I believe it's called the Joint Commission on Ethics and Lobbying Reform, which was set up in the wake of the arrests / investigation / now guilty plea of several sitting lawmakers. And former state representative David Harris, who is now, he's a Republican. He's one of those ones who voted with Democrats to end the budget impasse. And now he is Governor Pritzker's revenue director. I made a joke to someone that he's the Ray LaHood of Illinois, and then I thought, well, Illinois already has a Ray LaHood, because of course Ray LaHood was
We could use
Republican.
more Ray LaHoods, but
yes,
that's-
but he is a man who is known for working across the aisle and sort of having his own mind on things. And he said he took issue with this idea that we have a culture of corruption in Illinois, and says, we have some bad apples. And I was thinking about this in contrast with Governor Pritzker's assertion that this is a poison in the bloodstream or an infection in the bloodstream.
A
He used
scourge.
scourge, yes, but he definitely used that
mixed
word
metaphors. There was a
bloodstreams.
scourge in
there's-
our bloodstream.
Yes. But it was very vivid language, and so that's kind of the idea. Is it some bad apples? Is it an illness deep in our core? And it was actually my intern, Mike, this year, who pointed out, isn't the whole phrase there, a bad apple spoils the bunch? Which I thought was an interesting way of looking at this. And I guess, figuring out whether you really need to do something, whether this is just a matter of laws. I mean, everything, the reason we know about the people that have been accused or now pleaded guilty to corruption is that they broke or allegedly broke existing laws.
Correct.
So you always have people, it seems, who will push the boundaries. Is that because, though, Illinois has a broader transactional culture, right? What can you do for me? How can I scratch your back? As opposed to, let's just all sit down and figure out what the very best thing to do is.
Had the governor raised the issue of hiring and patronage, and Illinois is the poster boy, or one of the poster boys for that job-oriented patronage culture, not what you know, but who you know, and the wink and the nod. And that goes from, Vienna, Illinois, and Paul Powell through Kankakee and George Ryan to, whatever Dick Mills' ward was where Rod Blagojevich came from. And so there's a way of doing business in Illinois and attitudes about politics that are that are a problem, that do lead to corruption. And so I think Pritzker is right, but you always get the response whenever you talk about reform, and no matter it's campaign finance, lobbying reform, well, it's a few bad people. We don't want to, we don't want to make things too tough, too difficult. It's hard to fill out these forms,
I'm bad at crossword puzzles too, but yeah.
Yeah. So but it was important for the governor because corruption's on the front page of everything. The speech, in terms you look at the newspapers across the state, TV stations, they highlight what the governor said about corruption. Pritzker needs to get out ahead of that issue if he's going to sell ultimately the graduated income tax, which is a trust me.
Okay, but fair enough, not to cut you off here, but we have a governor here, and it just came to me out of the blue, Toy Hutchinson. She shepherds a cannabis bill through the General Assembly and ends up more than doubling her salary for a newly created job in the governor's office that pays more than $200,000 a year. And you're out here telling us that things have changed? I guess that's maybe one example. I'm saying this having had the pleasure today of spending 3+ hours witnessing the Joint Commission on whatever it is they're trying to do with regard to ethics and lobbyists and stuff. And what I heard time and time again from legislators is, we don't want to discourage people from running for office. We here in Illinois have a citizen legislature, and so we need citizens to run for these high public offices, and if we require them to say stuff like, here is other business interests that I'm involved in, that would discourage people from running for office. Do we have a citizen legislature? A true citizen legislature?
No, I don't think so. I mean, many legislators have other jobs. It certainly meets enough, and the demands on time are enough that I don't think you could really hold down. There are people who have jobs where they, there have been police officers and people like that who seem to be able to get extended leaves of absences to go be a legislator that I don't think many of us who have, would not be able to get those same privileges.
Okay.
And so, the legislature ends up being made up of people who can either afford to take or have a type of job where they can take a lot of time off. So you end up with a lot of lawyers, people who work in real estate, for example, bankers, and you have fewer people who don't have that sort of flexibility, such as, plumbers, teachers, people like that.
Not many Taco Bell assistant managers in the General Assembly.
No, I don't know that there is a single one of those right now.
Yeah. And so I guess having witnessed this and seen it, what I walked away with was a feeling that the folks that have been put in charge of this joint commission, and it's bipartisan. There's senators, there's representatives, there's folks, Christine Radonio, who's got a lot of experience and has seen a few rodeos, Juliana Stratton, the lieutenant governor. And the overall takeaway at the end of it, LG Sims and Greg Harris, it was the bad apple thing again. It's
And if you want to encourage good people to run for the legislature. We don't even lack of candidates for people who want to file petitions and run for the General Assembly.
Everybody who wants to run the world, raise your hand.
But the quality is the question.
Yeah.
And I don't think by a relatively low salary, given the demands that we have on legislators, plus the opportunity to supplement your lifestyle with your campaign fund or whatever else people get involved with, is the way to attract the best people. You want to have a quality legislature. It's like everything in life, you get what you pay for. And so, and you don't want a part-time citizen legislature managing the state of Illinois. If you don't exercise the will of the people through the General Assembly, if they're ineffective, then the governor's office, the agencies are going to run it, the interest groups are going to run it. You want the legislature to compete by having good people.
Okay. Well, we all want good people, but they're treating this, they're talking about it, at least they were today, like this is a part-time job. And a legislator makes $80,000 or so, and a lot of them a lot more because they have these titles. They're chairs of committees, or they're assistant deputy whip to the deputy whip, or whatever it is that adds to their money. And I think $80,000 is a pretty fair salary. I mean, just me talk, I don't make $80,000, and so that seems to me to be a fair salary. Now maybe it costs more perhaps to live in Chicago, but one thing I'm glad you brought up is campaign contributions, and that hasn't been brought up at all, or at least I didn't hear it today. But let's backtrack a little bit and talk about the former Senator Martin Sandoval. I mean, he wanted $20,000, and it wasn't going to go directly in his bank account. It was going to go to his campaign fund. That's what he wanted the money for. And so it's not just a salary in some cases, I think. It's also, you get a car that's paid for by your campaign fund. You want to eat a nice steak dinner. If you go with the right folks, you get it on your campaign fund. And what I walked away with today, again, was just kind of, I wonder how in touch these folks are with folks who live in Springfield and downstate and other places that live on a lot less than $80,000 a year. And or looking at the bad apples, I guess. Let's go back to Martin Sandoval for a second. And I don't mean to pick on I guess I do. He pled guilty, and he added to yet a long list of food references in Illinois corruption lore. He said, can you have something like a bologna company give me the $20,000 for my campaign fund, because it won't look good if the red light camera company gave it to me directly. And it's stinky as stinky gets. But there's also what was talked about today, and what has been talked about. These are just two folks. I mean, it's bad apples. It's Luis Arroyo, who has not been found guilty of anything at this point, and it's Martin Sandoval, who has now pled guilty. But Sandoval's agreement says he's got to cooperate with any investigations. How nervous, if at all, are we sure that it's just two folks, or is this going to spread?
I think that it has to it seems it would be hard to believe and shocking if it did not spread. I don't know whether it will spread in the General Assembly.
Fair enough, fair point.
But we certainly know that in the search warrant we obtained from the Senate Democratic Caucus that the federal agents served on them when they raided Senator Sandoval's office last summer, I believe it was, in early September, that there were all kinds of other people mentioned, municipal officials, lobbyists, people from various private industries, red light camera companies. There were even IDOT officials. Now, whether those people are potential accomplices or merely witnesses, that or potentially even victims, that is not known. In the federal government style of things, they refer to people as official A, official B, that sort of thing.
Yeah, then they get into the alphabet. It says official AA, official B.
Yes. Yeah. So this is a sprawling investigation, and I would not be surprised if it stopped. One thing that has been interesting to me, though, is that people talk now, they say, oh, Senator Sandoval, geez, what took so long? We've been waiting
and
for
that was brought up today. We all knew this.
We all knew. This was an open secret. This guy was so brazen about it. So
the rest of us apples knew there was a bad one here.
I took the opportunity to ask Republican leader Durkin at his post-State of the State news conference, well, can you tell us who's next then? If this was such an open secret, is there anybody else that there's an open secret that you'd like to let us know about right now? And he declined, or basically indicated that that he was not aware of anyone else who was in that league. Okay. But we'll see.
Well, one thing they're going to. Oh, I'm sorry.
No, what made the governor's got positive responses on the corruption, and big support from particularly Durkin, and who's a former prosecutor, and I think he's completely sincere in terms of his attitudes, that he thinks we need to have tougher laws and ethics. But because this is an unknown, we don't know what's coming. The one thing the legislator and the governor can do, and the individual members can do, is pass laws. And if they can say we passed A, B, and C, this lobbyist form, that thing. No one's going to know we're not going to know by the time we get to November whether or not they were good bills or not. We're just going to know that they passed good bills. And I think part of the enthusiasm on the Republican side is they believe that Pritzker the governor really needs a strong ethics package, and they think that they can use that the governor being an ally will allow them to get stronger ethics. They can take credit for it, and bipartisan credit, but they also, if these things, make it more difficult to do business in terms of people in power, well, it's the Democrats who are in power, so we don't really need to worry about the unintended consequences, because we're not getting any of the benefits from the status quo. So there's a lot more enthusiasm on their part for changing the status quo, but the politics of this are, we need to do something. We got to put some skins up on the wall so we can go to our constituents.
Even if it's faux fur.
Yeah, it's just to say, there's a bad people, but we got, we're going to clean government from now on bill passed, and so you can reelect me because I'm on your side.
This goes to what Kent was saying, I think, about, we won't know whether we won't necessarily know, or even, it remains to be seen how much the entire legislature cares about doing good bills as opposed to just getting something they can say they've done something.
Yeah. And again, having gone to the hearing today, and we'll never getting that time back, one thing that was impressed upon me is this is nothing new. Sheila Simon, our former lieutenant governor, talked about she had come up with economic interest statements where, at least in theory, you can look at these economic interest statements where legislators and other elected officials are supposed to say, here's the sources of money that I have outside of my government employ, so that we can see if there's any conflicts of interest. And they're often called, I guess, none sheets, because everybody writes none because there are so many loopholes. There's criminal sanctions for violating that, but nobody's ever been prosecuted. It's fairly weak, and everybody acknowledges it's weak. Sheila Simon today said, well, we were talking about this in 2012 about how to improve that, and it still ain't improved. I'm glad you brought up the search warrant on Martin Sandoval's office. The initial disclosure from the Senate President's office was less than good. It was a heavily redacted search warrant, and only when WBEZ Radio threatened to sue did we actually get the search warrant that said something, that told us what was more about what was really going on. And I guess a long-winded way of saying the last time Blagojevich, the last big scandal, not a lot happened. We had a lot of hearings, but there was a feeling that genuinely there was not a lot of real progress. Stuff like economic benefit statements, mandatory disclosure of conflicts of interest, that sort of stuff. We've been talking about this for a long time.
And just remember, while we have this commission exploring new ideas, last year when the temporary ethics watchdog, Julie Porter, had been the legislative inspector general for 16 months, after it had come to light that that position, the General Assembly had allowed that position to go vacant for years, literally, and complaints were just put in a drawer or put in a stack. I don't know literally how they were, but they were not addressed by anyone. She spent 16 months furiously going through all these older allegations and catching up and collecting new ones. And when she left, she said the office was broken.
Homer said the same thing, her predecessor, in 2014.
And she said that she told me there are 3 cases where she thought the allegations were founded, and the panel of 8 legislators who make up the Ethics Commission and decide whether those findings are made public, 2 Democrats, 2 Republicans, each from the House and Senate, they blocked the release of 2 of those cases. So, there are, and then her successor, Carol Pope, former appellate judge, has made a request of things she would like the office to do. And I don't believe that those have been, that the legislature has acted on those either. So there are things that people have been suggesting, going to your point about Sheila Simon, for years.
And what I had asked, again, I asked this of Greg Harris, the chairman, and I also asked this of Juliana Stratton today. And I said, one thing was a person with the Illinois Municipal League, Brad Cole, had mentioned almost in passing, what you could do, and his meaning was clear, you could shortcut a lot of this by making the General Assembly subject to FOIA and the Open Meetings Act. And so I asked both Greg Harris and Juliana Stratton what they thought about that idea, and they really didn't say much about it. They just said, that's not our mission. We're not.
Now, one of the things that you got out of the speech yesterday in reaction to the corruption stuff was, the speaker did not come out and give a strong endorsement of this, and isn't Madigan going to block all of this? And interestingly enough, the Governor Pritzker could go back and look at what Rod Blagojevich did after taking office in, I think, 2003. And the legislature passed an ethics bill, and Governor Blagojevich vetoed it and said, here are my changes. And now what they did was actually negotiate a tougher bill. But the governor is in the driver's seat.
Absolutely.
And if he wants to exercise, leverage, if this is where he wants to expend capital, then once you get something out on the floor, it's very difficult for these members to vote against it. It's the secret to killing ethics, and reform is to keep it off the floor. And so the governor really is in a very strong position, and certainly has allies on the Republican side.
Absolutely, he does, and that's what I'm kind of wondering about, and I think a lot of people are, is that how much will the governor push this? I mean, because there hasn't been a governor that's done it in how long? Ever?
If anyone, and I mean his predecessor was in this position, but he had other priorities, I guess you could say. But I mean, if anyone is insulated enough, Pritzker doesn't need a dime from anyone in terms of campaign contributions. And I don't think to this day he's taken, if you look at his donor list, out of the 175 million or so that he funded his campaign with, or 170 million, I think there was like a few $1,000s that somebody made an in-kind contribution. Kent, you're the expert on this, but I mean, this man could be truly independent of everyone.
He needs to be able to, when pushing the graduated income tax,
Yeah.
he needs to be able to say, you can trust me. I've delivered. I've done this.
Yes,
Here's
he
the
need-
ethic. Yeah, and so he needs this. He doesn't need campaign contributions, but he needs to use this to restore trust, because the opposition to the graduate income tax is going to be, you can't trust state government.
Yep.
Why do you want to give them a blank check? And so this is job one in terms of the success he needs in the fall, which can get him to the money maybe to pay off pension debt, maybe to deal with property taxes. There's a tremendous amount, writing on this about people saying you've done it, and that was a good job on ethics reform.
And it's other stuff too. I mean, he's also talked about cutting state government by 6.5%. He's asked agencies last fall to come up with a budget cutting plan. We're nearly out of time here, but I agree with you. I think that he needs to deliver, I think, something to have the folks who are on the fence about graduated income tax saying, you know what, let's give this guy a shot. Am I wrong?
I don't think you're wrong. I think he can point to a lot of things he's already delivered outside of the ethics realm. But if you're talking specifically about ethics, yeah, I think, and I cannot remember the last time I've heard a governor take such a strong stand, particularly on the issue of ethics. Everybody talks about it, but I mean, he used some very visceral and unambiguous language.
And he's fired somebody too.
Yeah.
So, okay.
Sure.
Well, with that, we're out of time. And thanks for joining us on Capitol View. And we'll see you again next week.